Welcome to the series Speaking Up for Point Molate, in which invited speakers will address key questions and issues about Point Molate, and members of the public will ask questions. We'd like to begin this program by recognizing that we are gathered on unceded Ohlone land. For thousands of years, the Diehm Ohlone people have lived on the land that's now known as the East Bay, as well as Point Molate. We recognize the importance of this land for the Ohlone people past, present, and future, and invite you to join us in learning about and honoring the Diehm Ohlone history and their work today. Our speakers present for 30 to 40 minutes, then we'll have a Q&A. Please limit questions to 1 minute. Also, please use the chat to let us know how we can improve, or to leave your email if you'd like to be contacted directly with future meetings. I'll put the webpage for the speaker series into the chat. The session and future sessions will be recorded. I'm Pam Stello. I'm co-chair of the Point Molate Alliance and the Richmond Shoreline Alliance, and I serve on the board of Citizens for East Shore Parks. I live in Richmond, and I'm co-founder and co-host of this series with Sally Tobin. Sally's a biologist and retiree at the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics. She works with the Point Molate Alliance and the Richmond Shoreline Alliance, and is a member of the Bay Area Sea Kayakers. She serves on the board of Citizens for East Shore Parks. She lives in Richmond. Please wave Sally. Our Zoom administrator is Danny Zaki. Danny is an organizer with the San Francisco Bay chapter of the Sierra Club, focusing on Bay and shoreline issues. Danny's working towards a master's degree at UC Davis in political geography. Please wave Danny. Today, we're very pleased to have as our speakers Erin Diehm and Kelly Hammargren to tell us about the scope of the problem and the solutions within reach to prevent deadly bird window collisions. Erin and Kelly are at the forefront of policy changes that can make far-reaching and lasting differences for birds as well as biodiversity. Erin grew up in the Midwest and considers herself lucky to have spent childhood days wandering in fields of waist-high grass, marveling at creatures big and small. Since then, she's had several careers in science, teaching, and tech, but is now fully committed to protecting nature and especially to promoting biodiversity here in our urban areas. For example, she advocated on behalf of the trees in Berkeley traffic circles, serving on the traffic circle task force to ensure those trees were protected along the way ended up co-authoring a list of native plants that are pre-approved by the city for those spaces. As Parks Commissioner, she has helped spearhead the creation of a network of native plant habitat gardens in our city parks. There are now 10. They're thriving, bringing joy to the community and supporting a wonderful variety of bees, butterflies, and even birds. She and her husband, Keith, planted their yard as a native plant habitat garden about 8 years ago. It now attracts a surprisingly rich variety of creatures and has raised their awareness about the dangers birds face in our urban areas. Erin holds degrees in chemistry, Russian, and linguistics, and is grateful to speak with you tonight. After retiring from nursing and healthcare management as an RN, Kelly describes her path from nursing to climate, the environment, biodiversity, and local politics as a process that evolved over several years. Realizing early on how difficult it can be to make change, Kelly chose to focus locally. With the pandemic, city meetings on Zoom, and time on her side, Kelly turned attending city meetings into writing about them. The Activist Diary was born. The diary is personal, describing what Kelly observes at public meetings and her interpretation of what it all means. The Activist Diary is also a platform to educate readers on nature, habitat, biodiversity, and ecosystems to turn inaction into opportunities. Erin, would you like to begin?
Sure. Thank you so much, Pam. Let me share the screen. I'll make sure it's going. And hello to everyone out there in Zoom land. Okay, can you see my screen? Didn't hear anything. Is it good?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so let me hide one more control here. And I hide this. So the topic of our talk today is bird glass collisions, what we can do to help right now. These are photographs of birds that I actually took in our backyard here in the flats of Berkeley, just a few blocks from downtown. And well, you heard our bio, so I'll just skip past this, but photographs of us and little descriptions. And I really want to start by just saying thank you to Sally, Pam, and Danny, and to the entire community for giving us the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. We're thrilled to be here and to share with you what we've learned through our activism. Kelly and I have been very engaged for several years now to get Berkeley to pass a robust bird safe protection. And here's a photo of us at a recent meeting of the Zoning Adjustment Board. This was in the online newspaper, Berkeley Side. And we're asking for bird safe glass in a new building. We're showing photos of birds that I took in our backyard, the ones you just saw. And we're just, And we're just a few blocks from the Berkeley High School. And at this meeting, we wanted to emphasize with the city council that nature is here, or the ZAB, in our cities, and that we can protect it. Now, like most people, we've had the experience of being in a room and hearing that kind of sickening thunk when the sound of a bird flying into the glass. And for example, my husband and I actually, the window that faces to the west onto the backyard, last year, we actually had 2 different window strikes. Small songbirds flew into the window, and luckily we heard them and we were able to go out there and gather them up very quickly. And we took them to Lindsay Wildlife, and luckily they actually survived. But we were quite traumatized by it, and we immediately took action and actually hung some treatments on the window, and we'll show those later to you. But we also know that bird strikes like that, many more of them are happening. We just have not been aware of them. And I think Kelly has an example to share.
I heard a thunk on my window, and I have a window that's facing the south, which has a screen on the bottom and plain glass on the top. And a couple of days later, I went out in the yard, and the bird that hit my window was not lucky like the bird that hit Erin's window. I found the little dead bird in my yard. It was just crushing.
Yeah. And I'm sure that I imagine each of us has actually had similar experiences. We've heard that sound. And so tonight, I think we all want to help prevent this from happening. And we want to share with you some solutions this evening. So tonight we'll cover 5 topics: the problems and solutions. We'll give an overview of the bird safe legislations, and then we'll focus on Berkeley's pending bird safe ordinance. And lastly, we'll end with a request for your help to help protect our birds. It was September 2019 when the study was published that nearly 3 billion birds have disappeared from North America since the 1970s. This is a huge loss, and it's almost 1/3 of all birds. Here's a quote from the New York Times. Nearly 1/3 of the wild birds in the United States and Canada have vanished since 1970, a staggering loss that suggests the very fabric of North America's ecosystem is unraveling. And here you see a chart illustrating the decline over the past 50 years. And see how it started with 10 billion birds, if you look here on the left. We're now down to 7 billion. I think it's good to keep that number in mind, 10 to 7 billion. And again, that's almost 1/3 of all birds gone. Even common birds are disappearing. For blue jays, 1 in 4, grosbeaks, 1 in 4. And for dark-eyed juncos, which we actually see quite frequently here in Berkeley, is 1 in 3 have been lost. There are many factors contributing to these steep bird declines, like habitat loss, development, and agriculture. But the one that we can address right now is how we design buildings. In fact, as we see in the title of this article, glass facades are the main culprit for billions of annual bird deaths. Bird window collisions are estimated to kill up to 1 billion birds each year in the United States alone. And in Berkeley, it's anywhere from 100,000 to 600,000 birds that die every year due to collisions with glass. And that number will only grow as we continue to add buildings. We can fix this. This picture illustrates different kinds of collision threats. and the estimated bird loss at each. We are especially interested in the structures that contain glass windows. On the right are the medium and tall buildings, which are typically mentioned when we speak about bird glass collisions. However, look left where the residential buildings are shown, and you'll see that they contribute to a significant number of bird mortalities too. Here, the estimate is 253 million. Additional studies that focus on collisions with just these kinds of buildings have found that our residences are a major threat. In fact, while 56% of fatalities occur at taller buildings, 44% happen at our low-rise homes. And this is why it's so very important that any bird-safe protections include residential buildings too. Now, why do birds collide with glass? Here are some of the primary causes. The first is reflection. Birds see the reflection of the trees or the bushes or sky, and they fly towards the reflection as if it's real. Then there's transparency. Birds cannot recognize glass as a solid object, so they try to fly through it to the vegetation visible on the other side. But instead of reaching the plants or trees, they strike the glass and are often mortally injured. Light pollution is another factor. It pulls migrating birds off course. It draws them into cities where they can face many threats, including predation and building glass. One more nugget. The San Francisco Bay Area is on the Pacific Flyway, a major corridor of migratory birds, flying from as far north as Alaska down to Central America and South America or beyond. Hundreds of millions of birds fly over or pass through our cities here in the Bay, and it is incumbent upon us to protect their passage. We've learned a lot recently about the behavior of migratory birds. Weather radar is used to track mass migrations. You may have heard of birdcast. And tiny little GPS devices can now be installed on the backs of birds, and they give us incredible real-time tracking data. From this new data, we know that light pollution will pull birds off their migratory path into our cities, and juvenile birds, those making the long flight for the first time, are especially vulnerable. Here we see some additional threats, like rooftop glass windscreens down here, and these are all the rage right now, going up on top of all kinds of buildings. There's also skyways and walkways and glass walls. Green roofs and other designs can also trap and kill birds. And we're also seeing a lot of buildings now being approved with green roofs, but there are windows that often surround it, and those windows currently do not include protections. You may remember the peregrine falcon Lux from the Campanile a few years ago. He died after crashing into a glass balcony on a campus building. At the bottom of this article, we can see the quote that confirms the danger of reflections in windows, and I'll just read it. Window strikes are a common cause of death of raptors. Windows reflect the sky and clouds. It looks like they are flying into the open sky. Many people have told me they've seen or heard a bird fly into one of their windows and the bird flew away, so it was just fine. But what people don't see is what happens to the bird afterwards, as it suffers from its injuries, which, if they don't die immediately upon impact, can make the bird vulnerable to predation. Birds can hit glass at speeds of 25 to 35 miles per hour. Birds often suffer from concussions, which can take days to kill them. And if the collision kills a parent bird, the young will most likely die too. This is preventable if people take action at their homes and in their cities. Now we want to talk about solutions. Where can we turn to for help? The American Bird Conservancy is the recognized authority on bird safety. They have a wonderful website pictured here, which is chock full of resources and information. The website is simply abcbirds.org. There are many ways to protect birds, many solutions. New glass can incorporate patterns to make the glass visible, and existing glass can draw from a wide variety of treatments like screens, shutters, parachute cord, tape, dots, and films, to name just a few. That American Birds Conservancy website we were looking at on the prior slide, it's fantastic, and it offers about 174, I think, right now, different solutions with descriptions and links for each one. So I highly recommend it. It's a really great resource. This slide shows how you can fix your windows to be bird safe without replacing them. In the upper left, we can see that there are dots or film, which is in the lower left, and this is what Kelly did after she had that bird strike. In the upper right, there's parachute cords, which is also called acopian blinds, and this is another option. And this is actually our window. This is the one that we had 2 birds fly into. And you may actually be able to see the reflection of the tree behind the cording that's hanging down. And this cost us about $18. And then in the lower right, you can see there's paint or tape. Here are the guidelines to ensure that visible markers are effective. First, the treatments must be applied to the outside or the exterior surface of the window, which is sometimes called surface 1. Markers need to stand out and be no smaller than 1/4 inch. The entire surface of the glass needs to be covered, and the markings need to be separated by no more than 2 inches by 2 inches. And the diagram down at the bottom shows a 2x4, which adheres to what's called the 2x4 rule. But if we're trying to protect all birds, even smaller birds like hummingbirds, the standard is now a bit smaller at 2 by 2 inches. So 2 by 2 may seem awfully small, but birds are incredibly adept to fly through small spaces. And in fact, just think about how birds can actually fly through trees. There's really small and moving spaces there. Here is a photo. We can see a swallow, how it flies through a space that is just 2 inches wide and is flying at 35 miles an hour. We don't want birds hitting glass at those high speeds. Here are some elements that were considered when developing the bird safe ordinance for Berkeley. The location, is it everywhere or just near water? The height, would it apply to the whole building or something less? And the facade, how much glass on the side of the building is a threshold? Building types and building size are considered, and also the all-important threat factor. The threat factor tells us how effective a given treatment is for deterring bird collision. This is how the American Bird Conservancy tests new products. They capture birds in the wild, handle them gently, and place them in a tunnel, which is made out of a shipping container. And then they let the birds go. The bird flies the length of the tunnel and is caught in a net before it crashes into the glass at the end. At the end of the tunnel is a plain piece of glass on one side and a treated piece of glass on the other. And they monitor how the bird responds to the treated glass if it avoids it. Again, the birds are caught in a net before they actually reach the glass, and then the birds are quickly released out the side little trapdoor there. And it's important to understand that the lower the number, the lower the threat factor, the more effective the treatment is. It's kind of like golf. You want a low number. Now I want to walk through some solutions or some treatments that are very common, but not actually effective solutions. In fact, they're so ineffective that they are not rated with a threat factor. So the first one is interior blinds, shades, and screens. And you see that down here in the lower left and over here in the middle right here. The reason that these are not effective is because it does not address reflections. So typically remember that the bird sees a reflection of the sky or trees, it will fly into the glass. The bird actually can't even see these treatments that are behind the glass. And the other thing with shades and blinds is that people often draw them during the daytime hours. So the bird can actually still see through the glass if there's not a reflection. Another one that's really common are these decals like up here with this hawk. So the first thing, I think there was an assumption that the hawk might actually scare birds away, but that doesn't work. But what's even more important is that this does not adhere to the 2x2 spacing. So you can see that there's a lot of untreated glass on this window. And the only way that these decals could actually be effective is if they were placed so closely together that there wouldn't be any space that were smaller than 2x2 inches. So in general, they are not effective. Also, awnings and overhangs, angled glass and tinted glass, they're no longer considered adequate protection. So here's an excellent example illustration why interior treatments do not work. And I'll simply quote from the ABC website, the American Bird Conservancy's website. It says, if you could see your test material most of the time, birds will too. So like your shades or your blinds. And an insight solution may work for you. In many cases, however, internal solutions do not work. And reflections will hide your solution during part or all of the day, thereby reducing or eliminating its effectiveness. And one more thing, putting plants near the window, like we see here, can be a serious hazard. During those times of the day when the glass is transparent, the bird sees the plants on the inside of the window and may try to fly to the plant. So we've shown you some things you can do to help. Now we want to focus on something bigger, on bird safe ordinances and legislation. And again, the American Bird Conservancy website is a very rich resource. It's got a model ordinance, guidelines for writing legislation, and existing ordinances, including an analysis is if they're recommended, considered adequate or not, and much more. Now we're going to talk about the existing ordinances. Here are some of the ordinances listed on the American Bird Conservancy's webpage. And most importantly, if they provide adequate protection. Out of all 24 ordinances listed on the website, only 3 are recommended. This means that the vast majority of ordinances currently in place are insufficient. We're especially struck by the 14 that are not recommended, because half of them are located in the Bay Area, which we listed for you here. San Francisco was the first ordinance passed in the United States in 2011. It was groundbreaking at the time, but not anymore because the science has changed. Unfortunately, many Bay Area cities have since modeled their regulations after San Francisco. They need to be updated. I want to tell you one more thing. Berkeley City Council will vote on a bird safe ordinance on June the 6th. The planning department based their original recommendations for an ordinance on regulations from neighboring cities like those listed here, ignoring the fact that those ordinances do not provide adequate protections and are not recommended. So why are these ordinances not recommended? Let's just kind of look through this list. Sometimes it's because they apply to too few locations. For example, San Francisco's only applies if the building is within 300 feet of an urban bird refuge. We can see similar things for Santa Cruz, San Jose, and Oakland. And this leaves the birds in the rest of the city completely unprotected. Sometimes it's because it only applies to big pieces of glass. But you have to remember that little swallow that was squeezing through that 2-inch little gap, the 2x2 rule. That's why when we're using dots, we recommend the 2 inches by 2 inches. But you can see here that some cities like Alameda and Emeryville allow 12 square feet of untreated glass, which is inadequate. And other times, the ordinance is so complicated and has so many thresholds that it rarely applies, like in Richmond. Next, I want to talk about the pending ordinance in Berkeley. As you all are keenly aware, going from a good idea to a final vote and then to implementation requires continuous engagement from motivated and dedicated community members. And we want to share with you our experience advocating for robust bird safe standards here in Berkeley. Okay, so we'll talk through this a little bit. So the Berkeley Bird Safe Ordinance is 5 years in the making. This diagram shows a number of key meetings, but rest assured that there were many more. It all started back in 2018 when a Berkeley City employee found 2 dead birds on the sidewalk in front of her office downtown. Those 2 birds had died from colliding with window glass. She then approached the Environmental Commission and the Audubon Society, and together they wrote the first version of the Bird Safe Ordinance. It eventually went to City Council in 2019, who then referred the ordinance over to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission was asked to investigate and then come back to Council with a final ordinance. And what some people may not realize is that a referral sent to the Planning Commission really goes to the Planning Department and city staff, who already have a long to-do list. During the next couple of years, COVID and other planning priorities kept the Bird Safe Ordinance from being worked on. But in the meantime, Kelly and I showed up at meetings after meetings frequently and regularly to remind the commissions and city council about this important legislation and to urge action. Now we fast forward to March of this year. The planning department brought an ordinance based largely on the ordinances of neighboring cities, which you may recall are on the not recommended list. We were very worried, but thanks to the work of the Planning Commission's subcommittee and Golden Gate Audubon Society, Golden Gate submitted an alternative ordinance, and it was unanimously approved by the Planning Commission. And this is why we have the smiley face here with the hearts emoji, because it was a really, really good day. After that, the Planning Department took the ordinance approved by the Planning Commission to the Design Review Committee here for discussion to see if there was any support for making these changes. We were at that meeting and can tell you the support was very strong. And the discussion ended when one of the committee members, an architect, said, "I support this 100%. The next step is for the item to come to City Council for the final vote. That happens June 6th, Tuesday. And even though the Planning Commission approved a science-based ordinance, we are concerned because we don't know if the Planning Department will attempt to resurrect their original proposal, which is based on our neighboring cities that the American Bird Conservancy rated as needing significant changes or not recommended at all. And this is why it's so important that we show up and speak in support of the ordinance that was approved on May 1st by the Planning Commission. If there's one thing we've learned during this whole process is how much work and education is needed on urban biodiversity. As you saw in the migration map towards the beginning of these slides, we're all connected. Our cities are landing spots for migrating birds. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. And the bigger picture is we'd really like to see state and local entities incorporate into their legislation urban biodiversity, habitat, and the restoration of local ecosystems. And now I'm going to pass the ball over to Kelly.
Hello. Here are the details from the Bird Safe Ordinance that were unanimously passed by the Planning Commission. And we keep saying that, unanimously passed on March 1st. There's a lot of information there. We've already covered some of it, so let's focus on the high points. First, the ordinance only applies to new and replacement glass. It does not require anyone to go take out their windows and replace existing intact windows, but we have shown you what you can do to make your windows bird safe. The ordinance only applies when a building permit is required. And for smaller projects, there's a phase-in period over 2 to 5 years. All glass treatments must follow recognized bird-safe precautions. And remember, the testing tunnel we showed you, that's how we get to the threat factor of 30. And Berkeley settled on a threat factor of 30 or less for bird-safe treatments. The ordinance would apply from 0 to 100 feet above grade. So that means from the ground up to 100 feet. And that's because that's where most of the action takes place with birds. So, but in a perfect world, we'd really like bird safe glass for the entire building. But because there is a cost involved of adding bird safe glass, there's a compromise to 100 feet. And that will take care of most of the buildings that are going up. But for those buildings that are 25, 26 stories that are being approved in Berkeley, that would mean the upper floors would have regular glass instead of bird safe glass, unless we can talk the developer into doing the whole building, which you can count on Erin and I trying to do. So we can go. Oh, and I want to point out, go back to that slide a second, Erin. So I want to point out in the requirements that we have the samples of the dots. And there's also another alternative of having a line going across the windows. And if you go down to 600 Addison by Aquatic Park, there's a new building going up. And we weren't able to get glass 100% because we didn't have this ordinance in place, but we do have bird safe glass facing Aquatic Park. And that the choice for that building is the lines. Okay. Next slide. So I mentioned cost. The cost always comes up during discussions on bird safe glass. The developer is looking at the immediate cost, but these buildings will be with us for decades, 50 to 100 years. In fact, my little house is over 100 years old now. So we need legislation that takes into account the total long-term impacts. One phrase that I think of over and over, and I used to use it on my job, is penny wise and pound foolish. So we need to look at the long-term cost. And what is the research, the actual cost? And I'm just going to read this to you so that and then we'll talk about it a little more so we can really digest it. There are 3 considerations. I've already mentioned those. 50 to 100 years or more is how long the buildings will be with us. It's possible to keep the cost the same by slightly reducing the size and the amount of glass in a building. And then remember, big buildings buy windows by large volume on special order. So cost citations. Study from the Acopian Center for Ornithology at Muhlenberg College found that the monthly debt service on a medium-sized office building was $32,900. And that having bird safe glass will only increase that amount by $125 for the cost of the bird safe glass. Estimates range from increased total cost for bird safe glass from 0.17% to 0.38%, depending on the size of the product. So while there's a lot of fear and anxiety about that cost, it really isn't that much. 2, additionally, simply by reducing the total amount of glass, developers can achieve both material cost savings and long-term energy savings. Bird safe glass will help align incentives for addressing climate change, even as it directly addresses the biodiversity crisis. And this is from a letter from Glenn Phillips, the executive director of the Golden Gate Audubon Society, to the Design Review Committee for that April 20th meeting we had discussed. Another study in the New York City Convention Center installing collision-proof glass. The glass cost was under $1 more per square foot compared to untreated glass. And then fourth, this is from the California Building Standards Commission. Portland cites cost studies of a local library and a health center, comparing vision glass to fritted or UV pattern glass, and found that increases the cost of 0.05% and 0.03% respectively. In the overall building costs independently, this author evaluated building materials for cost, finding that opaque materials like concrete or plaster are about half the cost of glass. Some designers of bird-friendly buildings note that costs are not significant if features are incorporated in early design. Retrofitting elements to shield glass will add cost, but economical options can be found. Okay. So those are the specific studies. And then our bird safe ordinance. Berkeley has really taken what we've learned since 2019 and with the help of the Audubon Society. So this is what Glenn Phillips, executive director of the Golden Gate Audubon Society, says. The ordinance, that's Berkeley's ordinance, will be among the most effective bird-safe building ordinances in the country, if approved in its current form by the City Council. And so why is this so important? It's that birds are in steep decline. Birds provide essential ecosystem services. Birds enhance our health with their song, beauty, and antics. Think of the cow falcons, how we all watch the falcons. Basing the glass treatments on the American Bird Conservancy's threat factor means that new materials will be available for use as soon as they are tested and rated. So there's no need to revisit this policy once it's written for new materials. Our buildings will be with us for decades. Protect birds for decades to come. Think about that, 1 billion birds dying from collisions with glass every year. So when we have bird safe glass, that's what we're preventing. And a healthy, wonderful ordinance in Berkeley will spur other cities to take action. So what are we asking you to do? We're asking you to help us with the Berkeley City Council final vote on Tuesday, June 6, 2023 at 6 p.m. If you can attend in person, that's best. It's at 1231 Addison Street, the Berkeley Unified School District Boardroom. And this is also offered on Zoom. So if you can attend in person, great, and online if you must. Emails really make a difference, and they don't have to be long. And so just a short email that says vote for the bird safe Berkeley ordinance that was unanimously passed by the Planning Commission on March 1st, 2023 covers it. Of course, you can always write more, and then tell your friends. And as I said, show up in person if you can, online if you must. And if you forget everything else, you can go to the city website and it gives you all the directions for showing up and sending an email. And I've also put my email in the chat. And so as Erin, if you need a reminder, if we can help you, help us, and all of us then help the birds. Okay, so here we are, birds. And you see that little mourning dove down in the bottom corner. I don't know how everybody feels about mourning doves, but I've had mourning doves nest on my porch now for quite a few years, and they just returned yesterday. And so I have another, in a few weeks, there'll be another little clutch of baby birds. Thank you. So do we have any questions? We're here to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. I was unable to unmute myself. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. And Sally will moderate the Q&A. Sally?
Okay, I don't see anyone on a telephone, so please raise your electronic hands, which is usually under reactions, if you would like to ask a question. And then when I call on you, then Danny will send you a link that will allow you to be unmuted. Okay, so Jeannie Courts has a question.
Yes, thank you. That was extremely informative, and it's disconcerting and distressing to know that so many birds, we've lost so many birds, and primarily it appears from window strikes. And I've had that same experience hearing that thunk, and it's a horrible sound to hear. I guess I'm distressed about the fact that Richmond needs to have some kind of a program to implement bird safe glass. I know you're working on the Berkeley City Council, and I'm happy to send them an email. If this passes for you, would you be willing to maybe I don't know, go before our planning commission and make and do a presentation regarding this?
Absolutely. I mean, this is exactly why it's so important to get this through Berkeley, and we're nervous about it. We're really nervous because if we get it through Berkeley, we've even had this conversation with Glenn Phillips at the Audubon Society. That will give us the momentum to go back to all of our neighbors for all of those 7 ordinances that are ineffective and weak, to fix them. That's really our big goal, and to get everybody on the same page. And the thing about the Berkeley ordinance that was passed by the Planning Commission with the Audubon Society is it's a really simple, straightforward ordinance. It's only like 3 pages and 1 paragraph. So there's not all kinds of escape conditions and, extended descriptions and everything. It's just really straightforward. And the other thing that we decided with our ordinances was part of the long discussion is whether or not to do a phase-in period. And we, the Planning Commission and all of us, when we spoke out as we could, we argued for a phase-in, because once you get an ordinance passed, it's very hard to go back to it. So even, we are volunteering, we're going to help you, but it's going to be, it's going to be a challenge to go back and to fix what is now incomplete. So we did a phase-in for the smaller buildings and single family homes, and many of the ordinances that are not accepted, most of them really don't deal with single family residences. And what you saw on that slide from Erin did on the big buildings, how many birds are killed by big buildings. But gee, there's a big chunk of birds that are killed by 1, 2, and 3 story houses, just these small buildings. So Berkeley is in the ordinance, the way it stands right now, we will deal with that. But those smaller, the residences are going to be phased in over several years. So, and then eventually it will take care of replacement windows. So,
Yeah, and one of the reasons for the phase-in was especially for the smaller structures, is that, we understand that we need to give the industry time to kind of catch up and start to increase their supply. And so that was also to accommodate the supply chain.
yeah. And one of the things that we can do for existing buildings, I mean, we mentioned it in the presentation Erin did, is just having screens on the outside of your window. And I think about, I replaced several of my windows, and one of those replacement windows is where the bird died. And if I had just ordered my double hung windows to open at the top and the bottom, it would have come with a permanent screen and there would have been no bird death.
Oh,
So, there are a lot of options for making our buildings safe. But the casement windows that are so popular now, those have the screens on the inside, and that's one of the things that, it doesn't help the birds, but outside it's perfect. And
Yeah.
that has a rating of 1, which means it's nearly perfect. A screen on the outside. That's better than the film I put on my windows. So when I take care of my other windows, I'm just going to put another screen over them.
I see. Well, thank you very much.
Mhm.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, well, so when you've saved the birds in the Bay Area and maybe gone on to save the birds in the world, are you going to work on lighting?
Oh, we tried.
Well, that was originally part of the referral. There were 2 parts of it. There was on glass, and then the second part was on dark skies ordinance. And so the dark skies ordinance, it has not been fully developed. And so that's kind of still waiting in the wings, but definitely that's a real issue. There, especially with, as we have, increased density, I think there's even more light being put into the cities, and also this kind of love of LEDs, where there tends to be an overlighting scenario that, and it often has, what we've learned, we've attended some workshops about this, is there are, I'm trying to think, 3 or 4 factors about lighting. There's the intensity, there's the color spectrum, and shielding. There's certain angles that it needs to be shielded. And just kind of looking around, it seems like those recommendations, which are from the Dark Sky Association, are not actually being followed. So definitely, yes, we definitely want to work on that. If we can get the glass ordinance passed, then the next focus will be dark skies, which we call dark skies, but actually I think it should be just called minimizing light pollution, because that's what it's about.
Yeah.
Right.
And the other thing is that with all this light pollution, that's killing the insects as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Danny put in the chat that her Loma Prieta chapter did a webinar about the dark skies issue recently, and she thinks there's a recording from that you could find on YouTube.
I think that's the one we went to.
We might have been. Yeah, thank you. It was actually a 4-hour presentation. It was fantastic. Yeah.
That's great. Pam, you have a question.
I was surprised that there aren't more ordinances around the world about this issue. So that's actually the 3 places that you listed. I believe it was Mountain View, New York City, Toronto, that have strong ordinances, and that really is the only ones globally.
I don't know about outside of the United States, and I don't think that the American Bird Conservancy has documented any. I could be wrong, but our focus has just been on, the United States proper. I will say there's one new ordinance that just got approved in Washington, D.C. And I think that one will probably be added to the 3. So hopefully it'll bring it up from 3 to 4. But yeah, there's still so few. Kelly, do you know have you heard anything about international ones? They must be out there.
Yeah, I haven't been searching for international ones, but I think, the big thing that happened after we started this process in 2018 was the publication of those studies in September 2019 of the steep decline in birds. I mean, those of us who are a little older, I mean, we know that there are fewer birds around, but that was really a shock that so many birds had just disappeared. And the way they were able to do that is that, you know, we have had avid birders for decades who are keeping records of birds. And so putting this all together, that was how those study results came about. And it was really a big shock.
Yeah, and even, I don't know if y'all are familiar with iNaturalist, I imagine so. And there's even now groups on iNaturalist where different locations are tracking dead birds and bird glass collisions. And I was actually looking at it yesterday. To be honest, I had to stop looking at it. It was so disturbing. But I think that's another way that we have access to these citizen scientists, big data type of databases that can really help us understand the problems and locate where they're worse. And it kind of just gives us a number and the understanding to then take the best actions possible. But that iNaturalist goes to iNaturalist page. All I gotta do is go to iNat, and then I think the search term I used was bird glass collisions, and you'll just come up with a list. And there's different cities, like I think it was Pittsburgh had a dedicated page. All kinds of different cities do. So we don't have any. I couldn't find any actually for the San Francisco Bay Area, which I was surprised. And I wondered if I just wasn't using the right search terms.
Well, kind of in line with that, Ellen asks in the chat, what is the source for the number of birds killed by windows in Berkeley versus nationwide?
That was an estimate that Glenn Phillips gave at the Planning Commission meeting, you know, looking at the number of buildings in Berkeley, is that he made that estimate. So there's not a study for that. It's his estimate.
They might have done one actually. He didn't tell us if they had gone out and done surveys, but there is somebody local who's actually testified at some of the meetings, and this person was instrumental in helping get San Francisco to pass their ordinance years ago, and where they actually did go as members of Golden Gate Audubon, and they picked up the dead birds. And so I think that I don't know if that may have happened here in Berkeley too. He didn't share that information in the letter that we saw. So it's possible they've done some kind of initial surveys, but it's really tricky because a lot of the birds too, you know, what they explained is the birds hit the glass so fast that they actually ricochet, and they can ricochet back to the other side of the street. And then of course they're injured. And so then they want to hide, and then they crawl underneath bushes. And then of course there's lots of predators. There's a lot of outdoor cats that then will remove the bird. So to do these kind of counts, you actually have these, and this does happen. They have to do counts at a certain time of the year, at a certain time of day, and try to catch it before actually, they either get eaten or taken away. And in addition, what we learned was in the downtown areas, they actually have the custodial crew go out in the morning and sweep up the dead birds. So one of the things that I've learned during this process is that we've kind of been protected from this reality of what's happening. And I don't know how we kind of raise the curtain on that to say, you know, this is happening a lot more than we really realize. Per birds killed nationwide, you know, we're relying on the data that we're seeing coming out of the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's just data that's in sources like there's Scott Loss is an ornithologist at Oklahoma State University. And he is one of the leading scientists in this field, and he's given talks on this and actually done some of the counts. So all I can say is I'm seeing these numbers reported in reliable sources. So Kelly, I don't know if you want to speak to the last one. Why are taller buildings exempted, especially if they're likely to be lit at night and kill many migrating birds in big cities?
I wish they weren't. And it's, you know, we're part of our struggle with this is the they don't want to do anything. So we're looking at, where is most of the activity occurring? And so most of the activity is really under 100 feet where birds are flying around rather than the top, because when they're migrating, they're migrating way up in the sky above the buildings.
Yeah.
But in a perfect world, we would have 100%.
Yeah. Well,
And
and it's especially because, like, I don't know if you all know about Birdcast. It's this incredible website where they use weather radar, like Doppler weather, I think maybe Doppler weather radar. And they actually track the birds as they're moving through across the continental United States. And they will tell you how many birds at any given time are flying overhead at night. And most birds migrate at night. And but one of the reasons, even though they do migrate at really higher altitudes and typically they will clear the tall buildings, there's another condition that's worrisome, and that's when there's weather. So what we were learning is that when weather comes in, that often brings the birds and they'll fly at a lower elevation, altitude, and then they're more likely to hit these taller buildings. And I mean, I had to say, why are the protections not being applied at the highest levels of the building? It's honestly, I think it's because it comes down to kind of resistance, and we really need the supply chain to catch up so that any resistance to incorporating the bird safe glasses, we can just kind of get beyond that. Wouldn't it be cool if we had bird safe cities?
Yes, bird safe and dark sky.
Yes.
Pam,
Right.
Pam, your hand is still up. Do you have a question?
No, I just didn't lower my hand.
Okay.
I just want to say one last thing is that a book that I read last year that really had just an incredible influence on me is Scott Wiedensaul's A World on the Wing, and it's about migrating birds, and it's just a wonderful book. And so I highly recommend reading it, and especially the chapter on big data. That's where we read about all those little GPS devices. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you so much, Pam and Sally, and everybody who came. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your 5 years of work on this issue, and for Golden Gate Audubon and Glenn Phillips. And we really want to come out and support you on June 6th, and we want everyone else to support you for this important issue. We will post any talking points or any flyers that you have. And we really want to help put Berkeley at the forefront of this. It's been too long that Berkeley hasn't been at the forefront of an important issue. So let's put them at the forefront of this issue. And so again, thank you. And I just want to let everyone know that next week, we will have Jacob Henry. He's the engineering geologist at the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board. He's responsible for Point Mulate's remediation and ongoing monitoring, and he'll be presenting about Point Mulate's remediation next week, 6 to 7. So we hope to see you all there. Thank you all very, very much. This has been incredibly informative and inspiring. Thank you.
Pam, Tony had his hand raised. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Tony. Yes, Tony, please speak.
A little drip of cynicism creeping in when we've had conversations, particularly about dogs, but also cats and feral cats, especially with the ground nesters, but all birds in general. And the comments you were making, people were making a moment ago, I couldn't help but think, oh, now you're going to have to contest the cat lovers.
That's definitely an issue. I mean, I think right now we just want to focus on the window glass at this time, but I have seen the numbers, and yeah. But one of the things that's nice is this is really in our immediate control. You know, I think when we think about climate change and global biodiversity declines, I don't know how you all feel, but sometimes it feels like it's so huge. And it's a problem that's very difficult to tackle. And this one, like just a design standard can fix so many of the problems. So it seems like a simple solution to a big problem. So,
That will have incredibly large impacts.
yeah.
For decades.
Well, thank you again. Are there any other questions? Okay, I think, have we finished? Thank you so much. That was really wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving us the time.
Yes, thank you.
And we hope to see you on June 6th.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.